I thought being judged by my appearance was the worst thing that could happen to me. But when the exclusive Oceanview Yacht Club humiliated me in front of everyone, I had no idea that one phone call would expose their shallow world and change everything forever. Some people think money talks, but what I learned that day is that integrity speaks even louder. Stay until the end, because what happened next will restore your faith in justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest challenge was choosing between working overtime at the community center or volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. I lived in a modest apartment on Maple Street, drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic that made strange noises when it rained, and bought most of my clothes from thrift stores and clearance racks. My daily routine was beautifully simple. Wake up at 6, jog through Riverside Park, grab coffee from the corner deli where Mrs. Chen always remembered my order, and spend my days coordinating programs for underprivileged kids. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt meaningful. Every day I got to see children's faces light up when they discovered they could paint or code or build something with their own hands. I watched teenagers who thought they had no future find scholarships and opportunities through our programs. The work paid enough to cover my basic needs, and honestly, I couldn't imagine wanting more than that sense of purpose. But there was something about my past that I kept carefully hidden from everyone in my life, something that would have changed how people saw me, how they treated me, and probably how they judged my choices. You see, I grew up in a world of private jets and charity galas, boarding schools, and summer houses in the Hamptons. My father, Richard Montgomery, built a tech empire from nothing and became one of the wealthiest men in the country. Until I was 18, my biggest decision was whether to wear the blue gown or the silver one to whatever fundraising event was happening that weekend. I attended the finest schools, vacationed in places most people only see in magazines, and never once worried about money or security or whether I could afford something I wanted. But I also never felt like any of it was real. The friends who only cared about my family's wealth, the boys who dated me for access to exclusive parties, the constant pressure to maintain an image that had nothing to do with who I actually was. When I graduated from prep school, my father expected me to attend an Ivy League university, study business or economics, and eventually take over some portion of his company. He had my entire life mapped out, complete with the right social connections, the right career path, and probably even the right husband from the right family with the right bank account. Instead, I shocked everyone by choosing a small state college where I could study social work and education. I wanted to understand what life was like for people who hadn't been born into privilege. The day I told my father I was majoring in social work instead of business, he looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a circus. "Sarah," he said, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk in his corner office overlooking the city, "this is a phase. You want to help people? Fine. We'll start a foundation. You can run charity events, organize fundraisers, make a real impact with real resources." But I didn't want to help people from a distance, writing checks and hosting elegant dinners where the wealthy congratulated themselves for their generosity. I wanted to get my hands dirty, to actually understand the problems I was trying to solve. I wanted to earn my own money, make my own choices, and figure out who I was when I wasn't defined by my family's wealth. So I did something that horrified my entire social circle. I took out student loans. I moved into a tiny dorm room with a roommate who had never heard of my family. I worked part-time jobs to pay for textbooks and groceries. For the first time in my life, I had to budget, had to choose between buying coffee or buying lunch, had to actually think about whether I could afford something. My father thought I was being ridiculous and dramatic. "This poverty act won't last long," he told me during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "When you're ready to stop playing pretend, your trust fund will still be here." But it wasn't pretend for me. It was the first time I felt like my life actually belonged to me. After college, I deliberately chose to work in communities where my background wouldn't matter, where people judged you by your actions rather than your address. I moved to Millbrook, a small town 3 hours from the city where my father's business empire felt like something from another planet. I rented my small apartment, bought my reliable used car, and built a life that felt authentic in ways my privileged childhood never had. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only person in town who could have afforded anything I wanted, but chose to live paycheck to paycheck because it felt more honest. I kept my real identity secret not because I was ashamed of my family, but because I wanted people to know me for who I actually was, not for what my bank account could buy them. For 3 years, this approach worked perfectly. I made genuine friends who liked me for my sense of humor and my dedication to helping others. I dated people who were interested in my thoughts and dreams, rather than my potential inheritance. I felt connected to my community in ways I'd never experienced growing up in social circles where everyone was performing wealth and status. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The catalyst for everything that happened next was my friend Jessica's engagement party. Jessica worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and she'd gotten engaged to Tom, a guy who worked in marine insurance and had somehow managed to become a member of the exclusive Oceanview Yacht Club through his job connections. The yacht club was the kind of place I would have been a member of automatically in my old life, but in my current world, it represented everything I'd deliberately walked away from. "Sarah, you have to come to the engagement party," Jessica pleaded during our lunch break at the community center. "I know it's at that fancy yacht club, but Tom's family insisted, and I really want you there. You're one of my closest friends." I could see how important this was to her, how nervous she was about fitting into Tom's more affluent social circle. I agreed because I loved Jessica and wanted to support her, but I also felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I knew exactly what places like the Oceanview Yacht Club were like. I'd grown up in them, understood their unspoken rules and social hierarchies, but I'd be walking in as the version of myself I'd chosen to become, not the version I'd been born into. The day of the party, I stood in front of my small closet trying to figure out what to wear. My nicest dress was a simple black number I'd bought at Target 2 years ago. My shoes were comfortable flats that had seen better days. My purse was a practical canvas bag I'd gotten at a church rummage sale. In my old world, I would have worn designer everything without thinking twice about it. In my current world, this was the best I could do, and it would have to be enough. As I drove my aging Honda toward the yacht club, I felt that familiar internal conflict between the person I'd been raised to be and the person I'd chosen to become. The Oceanview Yacht Club sat on the most exclusive stretch of waterfront property in the region, its pristine white buildings and perfectly manicured grounds designed to communicate wealth and exclusivity to anyone who approached. The parking lot was filled with luxury cars that cost more than most people made in several years. BMWs, Mercedes, Porsches, and vehicles I recognized as the kind of status symbols my father's friends drove to demonstrate their success. My little Honda looked comically out of place among all that gleaming metal and leather. Walking toward the entrance, I could feel people noticing me, cataloging my appearance, making instant judgments about whether I belonged in their world. It was a feeling I remembered from childhood, except then I'd been on the inside of that judgment, part of the group that decided who was worthy of acceptance. The yacht club's lobby was everything I expected: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of sailing ships, and an atmosphere that practically whispered old money and exclusive membership. The kind of place where your family's history mattered more than your character, where the right last name could open doors that talent and hard work never could. I approached the reception desk where a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression of practiced politeness looked me up and down with barely concealed disapproval. Her eyes lingered on my Target dress, my department store shoes, my practical purse, and I could practically see her calculating whether I belonged in this space. "I'm here for the Thompson Miller engagement party," I said politely, giving her my most confident smile. Jessica had told me the party was being held in the club's main dining room overlooking the marina. The receptionist's expression grew cooler as she checked her computer screen. "Name?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was already skeptical about finding me on any legitimate guest list. "Sarah Montgomery," I replied, maintaining my friendly demeanor even as I felt the familiar sting of being judged purely on my appearance. She scrolled through her system with exaggerated care, taking far longer than necessary to locate my name. "I see you're listed here," she said finally, as if this was somehow surprising. "However, I should inform you that the Oceanview Yacht Club maintains certain standards for our events and our facilities." The way she said standards made it clear she didn't think I met them. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger, but I kept my voice steady. "I understand. I'm just here to celebrate my friend's engagement." "I'm sure you are," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But I'm afraid there's been some confusion. This particular event requires appropriate attire, and our dress code is quite specific about what constitutes suitable formal wear for our dining room." I looked down at my outfit, which was modest, clean, and perfectly appropriate for any normal social gathering. "I'm wearing a dress and nice shoes," I said, confused about what could possibly be inappropriate about my appearance. "Well," the receptionist said, lowering her voice as if she was doing me a favor by being discreet, "our standards for formal events require designer attire, proper accessories, and frankly, a certain level of sophistication that matches our club's reputation. I'm sure you understand that we can't make exceptions, even for guests." The humiliation hit me like a physical blow. She was essentially telling me that I looked too poor, too common, too ordinary to be allowed into their sacred space. Around us, other club members and guests were beginning to notice the conversation, some of them stopping to watch what was clearly becoming a scene. "Perhaps," the receptionist continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "you could attend a different celebration for your friend at a more suitable venue. I'm sure she would understand that sometimes these upscale events aren't appropriate for everyone." I stood there feeling the weight of every judgmental stare, every whispered comment, every assumption being made about my worth based solely on the price tags of my clothing. This was exactly the kind of shallow, materialistic judgment I'd tried to escape by building a different kind of life. But here it was, following me anyway, ready to exclude and humiliate me just like it excluded and humiliated countless other people every single day. The worst part was that I could have easily avoided this humiliation. I could have bought an expensive dress, could have worn the jewelry sitting in storage from my previous life, could have shown up in a car that announced my ability to afford their approval. But doing so would have meant abandoning everything I'd worked to build, everything I believed about what really mattered in life. Standing in that pristine lobby, surrounded by people who measured human worth in dollar signs, I realized that this moment was about much more than one engagement party or one rude receptionist. This was about a system that decided people's value based on their appearance, their bank account, their ability to afford the right symbols of success. I thought about all the kids I worked with who would never be welcome in places like this, no matter how talented or kind or brilliant they were. I thought about Jessica, probably wondering where I was, hoping her friend would be there to support her on one of the most important days of her life. And I thought about the choice I had to make between accepting this humiliation quietly or doing something that would change everything. That's when I made the decision that would transform not just my evening, but my entire understanding of what it means to stand up for what's right. I pulled out my phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the one number I hadn't called in over 6 months. "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside me. "I need a favor, and I need it now." The conversation with my father lasted exactly 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone in that yacht club who thought they could judge people based on their appearance and bank account. "Sarah?" My father's voice carried that familiar mix of surprise and concern that always appeared when I called unexpectedly. "Is everything okay? You sound upset." I took a deep breath, glancing around at the pristine lobby where the receptionist was still watching me with that condescending smile, clearly expecting me to leave quietly with my tail between my legs. "Dad, I need you to bring the Serenity to Oceanview Marina. Right now. And I need you to request immediate docking at the yacht club's main pier." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The Serenity was my father's pride and joy. A 200-foot mega yacht that had been featured in architectural magazines and served as the venue for some of the most exclusive parties on the East Coast. It was the kind of vessel that announced wealth and power from miles away. "Sarah, what's going on? You haven't asked me for anything like this in years. Are you in some kind of trouble?" I'm standing in the lobby of the Oceanview Yacht Club, being told that I'm not appropriately dressed to attend my friend's engagement party. They're suggesting I leave because I don't meet their standards for sophistication. My voice remained calm, but I could feel the anger building underneath. I've spent 3 years trying to build a life based on character instead of credit cards, and right now I'm being humiliated because I chose substance over status symbols. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When my father spoke again, his voice had taken on the steel edge I remembered from his business dealings. "They're refusing you entry based on your appearance?" "They're not technically refusing entry, they're just making it very clear that people like me don't belong in their world. They're suggesting I find a more suitable venue to celebrate my friend's engagement, more suitable for someone of my obvious social class." I see. Those two words carried more weight than most people's entire conversations. "Sarah, I can be at Oceanview Marina in 45 minutes. The Serenity is currently docked at Harbor Point, and I can have the crew prepare for immediate departure." "Dad, I don't want you to think this means I'm giving up on the life I've built. I'm not calling because I want to go back to the world I left behind. I'm calling because sometimes the only way to fight a system is to use its own weapons against it. I understand completely. And Sarah, I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. I'll see you very soon." As I ended the call, I noticed that the receptionist had been listening to my side of the conversation with growing curiosity. The mention of a yacht and immediate docking had clearly caught her attention, though she was trying to maintain her superior attitude. "I'll be waiting for my father to arrive," I told her politely. "He's bringing his boat to pick me up since you've made it clear that I'm not welcome to attend my friend's party here." "Your father has a boat?" she asked, and I could hear the slight uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Something like that," I replied, taking a seat in one of the lobby's expensive leather chairs. "I hope it won't be too much trouble for your marina staff to accommodate him." What happened next was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. I had 45 minutes to wait, so I decided to make the most of it. I called Jessica to explain that I was running late due to some complications at the front desk, but assured her I'd be there soon. Then I settled in to observe the yacht club's social ecosystem from a new perspective. From my seat in the lobby, I could see into the main dining room where Jessica's engagement party was in full swing. She looked beautiful in a simple white dress, glowing with happiness as she and Tom greeted their guests. The room was filled with people I recognized from around town, some of whom I knew struggled financially but had clearly made significant efforts to dress appropriately for the venue. I watched the yacht club staff navigate between different groups of guests, their level of attention and service clearly calibrated to their assessment of each person's wealth and status. The wealthier guests received immediate attention, enthusiastic conversation, and obvious deference. The middle-class guests were treated politely but with noticeable distance, and I could see a few people who, like me, were clearly being made to feel unwelcome through subtle slights and cold shoulders. 20 minutes into my wait, I noticed a commotion beginning at the marina, visible through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows. Staff members were hurrying toward the docks, and I could see them pointing toward the horizon where a large vessel was approaching. The Serenity was still too far away to be clearly visible, but its size was already impressive even from a distance. The receptionist had been glancing at me periodically, clearly wondering what exactly I was waiting for. When the marina activity began, she moved to the window to get a better view, her expression shifting from condescension to curiosity. "That's quite a large yacht heading this way," she commented, speaking to one of the other staff members who had joined her at the window. "I heard someone requested emergency docking at the main pier," the staff member replied. "Must be someone pretty important to get priority access like that." I remained in my chair, watching their reactions while checking my phone for updates from my father. His text message was brief but satisfying. "Approaching marina now. Crew has contacted Harbor Master for immediate docking." This should be interesting. As the Serenity grew larger and more impressive, drawing closer to the marina, I began to notice other changes in the yacht club's atmosphere. Club members who had been focused on their own conversations were beginning to migrate toward the windows. Staff members were abandoning their posts to get better views of the approaching vessel. Even from inside the dining room, I could see Jessica's party guests beginning to notice the excitement building outside. The Serenity is not just large, it's magnificent. Custom built by one of the world's premier yacht designers, it features multiple decks, a helicopter landing pad, and amenities that rival most luxury hotels. When it's docked, it tends to dwarf every other vessel in the vicinity, making even expensive boats look like dinghies by comparison. As my father's yacht approached the main pier, I could see the marina staff scrambling to accommodate its size and ensure proper docking procedures. The yacht club's general manager had appeared and was now standing at the window with an expression of growing amazement and concern. "Excuse me," the general manager said, approaching my chair. I couldn't help but notice you mentioned your father was bringing his boat. Would that happen to be the vessel currently approaching our main pier? Yes, that would be the Serenity, I replied casually. My father thought it would be easier to pick me up directly from the marina since there seems to be some confusion about my welcome here. The general manager's face went through several rapid color changes. Miss Montgomery, I believe there may have been some misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss any concerns you might have about your experience here today. Oh, there's no misunderstanding, I said, standing up as I saw the Serenity beginning its final approach to the pier. Your staff made it very clear that my appearance and attire don't meet the standards for your establishment. Since I don't want to lower the tone of my friend's engagement party, I've arranged alternative transportation. By now, every person in the lobby was pressed against the windows, watching in awe as the massive yacht maneuvered into position. The Serenity's crew was clearly visible on deck, preparing docking lines and coordinating with the marina staff who were struggling to handle a vessel of this size and importance. The receptionist who had initially dismissed me was now looking back and forth between me and the yacht with an expression of growing horror. I could practically see her replaying our earlier conversation, realizing that she had just insulted and humiliated the daughter of whoever owned that magnificent vessel. Miss Montgomery, the general manager said, his voice now carrying a tone of desperate politeness. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced. I'm sure whatever happened was simply a miscommunication. We would be absolutely delighted to have you join your friend's celebration. That's very kind, I replied, but as your staff explained, I don't meet your dress code requirements. I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone by being inappropriately attired for such a sophisticated establishment. The Serenity was now fully docked, its impressive presence dominating the entire marina. I could see my father emerging onto the main deck, wearing the kind of casual but expensive attire that immediately communicated wealth and authority to anyone who understood these things. Please, the general manager continued, sweat now visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Let me personally escort you to your friend's party. We pride ourselves on hospitality, and clearly we failed to live up to our own standards today. You know what I think the real problem is? I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet lobby. I think your standards have nothing to do with hospitality or appropriateness. I think your standards are about excluding people who don't look wealthy enough to belong in your world. The truth was hitting its mark. Every staff member within earshot was beginning to understand that they had made a catastrophic mistake in judgment. The woman who they had dismissed as too poor and inappropriately dressed was clearly connected to serious wealth and influence. My father appeared at the yacht club's entrance, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. He was followed by two crew members who were clearly there for security and assistance, their presence adding to the sense of importance and power surrounding his arrival. "Sarah," he said, embracing me warmly while every eye in the lobby watched our interaction. "I'm sorry you had to experience anything unpleasant. Shall we go aboard and discuss what happened?" "Actually, Dad, I think there might be some people here who would like to apologize first," I said, looking directly at the receptionist and general manager who were now practically frozen with embarrassment and fear. The general manager stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Montgomery, please accept our deepest apologies for any misunderstanding. We had no idea that Miss Montgomery was your daughter, and we certainly never intended to suggest she wasn't welcome at our establishment." "I see," my father replied, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made powerful people nervous. "And what exactly gave you the impression that my daughter wasn't welcome here?" The silence that followed was deafening. The receptionist looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. The general manager was clearly calculating how much damage this incident might cause to his career and the club's reputation. "We have certain standards," the general manager began weakly, then stopped as he realized how that explanation would sound. "Standards," my father repeated thoughtfully. "What kind of standards would suggest that a well-dressed, polite young woman shouldn't be welcome at her friend's engagement party?" I watched the faces around us as my father's questions hit their mark. Other club members who had witnessed the earlier interaction were beginning to understand what had really happened. Some looked embarrassed by association. Others seemed genuinely shocked that their prestigious club had treated someone so poorly. The truth is, Dad, they assumed I wasn't wealthy enough to belong here. They suggested I find a more suitable venue to celebrate Jessica's engagement. They made it clear that people like me lower the tone of their sophisticated establishment. My father's expression darkened considerably. People like you? People who shop at Target instead of designer boutiques. People who drive older cars and carry practical purses. People who choose meaningful work over impressive bank accounts. I paused, letting the implications sink in. People who believe character matters more than credit scores. The general manager was now visibly panicking. Mr. Montgomery, I assure you this was an isolated incident. Our staff will be retrained immediately. We absolutely do not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Is that so? My father asked. Because it sounds like discriminating based on perceived wealth is exactly what happened here. My daughter was judged, found lacking according to your standards, and humiliated for the crime of not looking rich enough. At this point, Jessica appeared from the dining room, having noticed the commotion in the lobby. When she saw me with my father and the assembled crowd, her face filled with confusion and concern. Sarah, what's happening? Everyone's talking about some huge yacht, and people are saying you're involved somehow? I hugged my friend, realizing that this moment was about much more than my own humiliation. Jessica, I want you to meet my father, Richard Montgomery. Dad, this is Jessica, the friend whose engagement party I was hoping to attend. Jessica's eyes widened as she recognized my father's name. Like most people, she'd heard of Montgomery Technologies and the man who built it. But she was also clearly confused about why I had never mentioned this rather significant detail about my background. I owe you an explanation, I told Jessica. I've been living a different life than the one I was born into, trying to understand what really matters beyond money and status. But today, your yacht club made it clear that they judge people solely on their ability to display wealth. The yacht club did what? Jessica asked, her voice rising with indignation. They suggested Sarah find a more appropriate venue for celebrating your engagement, my father said, his tone making it clear exactly what he thought of that suggestion. They felt her appearance didn't meet their standards for sophistication. Jessica turned to face the general manager with an expression of fury I'd never seen from her before. You insulted my friend and tried to exclude her from my engagement party because of how she was dressed? Miss Thompson, please understand that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, the general manager said desperately. We would never intentionally insult any of our guests. But you did insult her, Jessica replied. You insulted one of the kindest, most generous people I know. Someone who spends her life helping others instead of worrying about designer labels and status symbols. The crowd in the lobby had grown significantly as word spread throughout the yacht club about the confrontation taking place. Some people were clearly enjoying the drama. Others seemed genuinely uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. My father stepped forward, his voice carrying easily through the marble space. I think this situation illustrates something important about institutions like this one. You've created a culture where human worth is measured by external displays of wealth rather than character or kindness. He gestured toward me with obvious pride. My daughter chose to build a life based on service and authenticity rather than privilege and pretense. She works with underprivileged children, lives modestly by choice, and makes the world better through her actions rather than her bank account. And your first instinct, he continued, looking directly at the staff members who had humiliated me, was to exclude her because she didn't look rich enough for your standards. You judged her worth based on her clothing budget rather than her character. The impact of his words was visible throughout the room. Some club members were nodding in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable as they realized they might have made similar judgments themselves. Here's what's going to happen, my father announced. Sarah is going to rejoin her friend's engagement party, and she's going to be treated with the respect and courtesy that every human being deserves. Not because of who I am or what I own, but because that's how decent people treat each other. The general manager nodded frantically. Of course, Mr. Montgomery. Miss Montgomery, please accept our sincerest apologies and join your friend's celebration. Everything will be taken care of. But I held up my hand, because I realized this moment was about more than just gaining entry to a party. This was about challenging a system that excluded and humiliated people based on arbitrary standards of wealth and status. "I appreciate the apology," I said, "but I want everyone here to understand something important. I didn't call my father because I needed his money or his yacht to prove my worth. I called him because sometimes the only way to fight discrimination is to force people to confront their own prejudices." I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Every person who works hard, who treats others with kindness, who contributes something positive to the world, deserves respect and dignity. Not just the people who can afford the right clothes or the right cars or membership in the right clubs. The children I work with will probably never be able to afford to set foot in a place like this, but they have dreams and talents and hearts full of hope. They deserve a world where their worth isn't determined by their parents, bank accounts, or their ability to display wealth. Jessica stepped forward and took my hand. "Sarah, I had no idea about your background, but it doesn't change anything about who you are to me. You're the same person who helped me through nursing school, who brought soup when I was sick, who listens to my problems and celebrates my successes." "That's exactly right," I replied. "Money doesn't change character, wealth doesn't create kindness." And excluding people based on their appearance or perceived social status says everything about the excluders and nothing about the excluded. The yacht club's atmosphere had completely transformed. What had started as a humiliating rejection had become a teachable moment about dignity, respect, and the true measures of human worth. My father smiled at me with obvious pride. "I think you've made your point beautifully, Sarah. Should we join the celebration now?" "Actually," I said, "I think Jessica and Tom's engagement party deserves to be celebrated somewhere that welcomes all their friends equally. Dad, would the Serenity be available for an impromptu celebration?" The joy on Jessica's face was worth everything that had happened. "Are you serious? We could have the party on that incredible yacht?" "If that's what you'd like," my father said warmly. "It would be my pleasure to host a celebration for people who understand that the best parties are measured by the happiness they create, not the exclusivity they maintain." And that's exactly what we did. Jessica's engagement party moved from the yacht club's formal dining room to the Serenity's spectacular decks, where every guest was welcomed with genuine warmth and hospitality. The people who had been made to feel uncomfortable or unwelcome at the yacht club flourished in an environment where their character mattered more than their clothing budget. As the sun set over the marina and Jessica and Tom danced on the yacht's main deck surrounded by friends who truly cared about their happiness, I realized that this day had taught me something crucial about standing up for what's right. Sometimes fighting discrimination requires using the very system that creates it. But the goal isn't to join the excluders. The goal is to break down the barriers that keep good people apart. The yacht club requested a meeting the following week to discuss policy changes and staff retraining. Several club members reached out privately to apologize and express support for treating all guests with equal dignity. And Jessica's engagement party became the kind of celebration that people remembered, not for its exclusivity but for its joy. Most importantly, I learned that you don't have to choose between authenticity and effectiveness. You can build a life based on your values while still having the tools to fight injustice when it tries to diminish your worth or the worth of others. Real change happens when people refuse to accept discrimination, when they stand up for dignity and respect, and when they use whatever resources they have to create a more just and welcoming world for everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.